resumed their periodic reciprocal destruction. Yet, within many of these newly arisen independent communities on the continent Asia, beings still continued to conform in their ordinary existence to many of the unprecedentedly wisely foreseen usages of the very saintly Ashiata Shiemash for their ordinary being existence, which usages had already been inseparably fused into their automatically flowing process of daily existence. And those to blame for the final destruction of these said usages and customs that still remained in certain communities were those learned beings who were then assembled in the city of Babylon. And they were then to blame in this respect, owing to the following. When, owing to that famous question of the beyond, they organized the general planetary conference of all the learned beings there happened to be also, among the learned beings who went to Babylon on their own accord, the great-grandson of Lenthro Hamsanin himself, who had also become a learned being. And he took with him there to the city of Babylon an exact copy of the mentioned Kashir Reitlir, but made on papyrus, the original of which had been inscribed by his great-grandfather and which he had obtained by inheritance. And at the very height of the frenzy concerning the question of the soul during one of the last big general meetings of the learned beings, he read aloud the contents of that maleficent invention of his great-grandfather's, whereupon it occurred, as it had also become proper to the sorry learned beings of this planet, thanks to their strange reason, that from one question which interested them, they at once passed to quite another, namely from the question of the soul to the question of what is called politics. Thereupon, in the city of Babylon, meetings and discussions again began everywhere concerning the various kinds of already existing state organizations and those which in their opinion ought to be formed. As the basis of all their discussions, they took, of course, the truths indicated in the invention of Lenthro Hamsanin, this time expounded on what is called a papyrus, that had been taken there by his great-grandson, and a copy of which almost every learned being who was then in Babylon carried in his pocket. For several months they discussed and argued, and as a result they this time split into parties, that is to say, all the learned beings then in the city of Babylon split into two independent what are called sections under the following names. The first, section of Neomothists. The second, section of Paleomothists. Each of these sections of learned beings soon had its adherents from among the ordinary beings in the city of Babylon, and once again things would certainly have ended also with a civil war if the Persian king, hearing of it all, had not immediately cracked them on their learned noddles. A number of these learned beings were executed by him, others were imprisoned with lice, and still others were dispatched to places where even now, as Mullah Nasruddin would say, French champagne could not be taken. Only a few of those who were clearly shown to have been occupied with all this, only because, as it is said there, they were mad, were permitted to return to their own countries. And those among them who had taken no part whatever in the political question were not only also given full liberty to return to their native land, but by the order of the mentioned Persian king, their return to their native land was even accompanied with every kind of honor. Well then, my boy, those Babylonian learned beings who, owing to various reasons, survived and were scattered everywhere over the surface of almost the whole of the planet, continued by momentum their wiseacring, the basis of which they had, of course, not consciously but simply mechanically, those two leading questions which had arisen and which had been the question of the day during the said Babylonian events, namely the famous questions concerning the soul of men and the inner communal organization. The result of these wiseacrings of theirs was that over the whole continent of Asia, civil wars again broke out in various communities, and the process of mass reciprocal destruction between different communities. The destruction which thus proceeded of the remnants of the results of the conscious labors of the very saintly Ashiata Shiemash continued on the continent of Asia for about a century and a half. Yet in spite of this, in some places there were preserved, and even by momentum were still carried out, certain forms that had been created by Ashiata Shiemash for their beneficent being existence. But when the three-brained beings there who arose and existed on the neighboring continent, now called Europe, then began taking part in the Asiatic wars, and when hordes with their arch-vainglorious Greek called Alexander of Macedonia at their head were dispatched thence and passed almost everywhere over the continent of Asia, they made, as it is said, a clean sweep from the surface of that ill-fated planet of everything that had been established and had still been preserved and carried out. So clean a sweep that it left not even the trace of the memory that there could once have existed on the surface of their planet such a bliss, specially and intentionally created for their existence by such a reason, whose possessor is now one of our 7 most very saintly omnicosmic individuals, without whose participation even our unibeing common Father does not allow himself to actualize anything. And now, my boy, after my tale about this Lentro Hamsanin, thanks to which you obtained to a certain degree a conspective account of the consequences for subsequent generations ensuing from the activities of such a typical representative of eternal Hasnamas individuals from among the three-brained beings of the planet Earth, it will now be quite opportune to explain to you, as I promised, a little more in detail about the significance of the word Hasnamas. In general, those independent individuals are called and defined by the word Hasnamas, in whom, among what are called individual impulses, a certain something arises which participates in what is called the complete formation of independent individuals in the common presences of three-brained beings, both of the highest possible coding, as well as of those who consists only of the planetary body alone. This something in these separate cosmic individuals arises and blends in the process of the transformation of substances in them, with the crystallizations resulting from the action of the entire spectrum of certain what are called Nalu-Osnian impulses. This Nalu-Osnian spectrum of impulses consists on the basis of that chief cosmic law, the sacred Heptapadaparshanach, according to the source of its essence in respect of the perception of engenderings, and the resulting manifestations of the 7 heterogeneous aspects. If these separate aspects of the entire spectrum of Nalu-Osnian impulses are described according to the notions of your favorites and expressed in their language, they might then be defined as follows.